Art is made to disturb. Science reassures. Now that was a quote by George Braque, and he is the artist that we are going to be studying today in art history. So George Braque is a French artist who was at the forefront of the art movement Cubism and is very well known for his collaboration with Picasso. Now, his long artistic career goes much further than just Cubism and Picasso, though. He was an inventor of collage and an original Fauvist painter, really playing with color and how it can represent things in our life. He was constantly playing with shape, with color, experimenting in art, and because of this, he inspired at least 6 different art movements after he passed. So today, together, we are going to dive into his life, his artwork, and his legacy. But before we get started, I have 3 key terms that I want you to remember. They are going to pop up through our conversation, and I just may quiz you on them in the end. So here they are. Our 3 key terms. Fragmentation, monochromatic, papier coulé. Okay, remember those 3 terms because here we go, diving into the life and the artwork of George Braque. George Braque was born May 13, 1882 in a little village in France. He was guided from a young age towards creative painting techniques. His father managed a decorative painting business, and Braque's interest in texture and tactility perhaps came from working with him as a decorator. In 1899, at the age of 17, Braque moved from Argenteuil into Paris, accompanied by some of his close artistic friends of the time. Now, Braque's earliest paintings were made in the Fauvist style. Now, Fauvism, it was the first 20th century movement in modern art. It was initially inspired by the examples of Vincent van Gogh, Paul Gauguin, and Georges Seurat, and Paul Cézanne. The Fauves, which means wild beasts in French, was a loosely allied group of painters with shared interests. Now, Matisse, he emerged as a leader of this group, and all the members, they shared the use of intense color as a vehicle for describing light and space. And they redefined pure color and form as means of communicating the artist's emotional state. So it was the first time that instead of just kind of painting a picture, painting realism, they used color, they used shape, they used imagery to express how they thought, how they feel. So in these regards, Fauvism proved to be an important precursor to Cubism and Expressionism, as well as a touchstone for future modes of abstraction. Now, from 1902 to 1905, after giving up his work as a decorator, Braque decided to pursue painting full time. And he was pursuing these Fauvist ideas, and he coordinated with Henri Matisse and became close friends. He contributed his colorful Fauvist paintings to his first exhibition at the Salon des Indépendants in 1906. However, he was extremely affected by a visit to Pablo Picasso's studio in 1907 to see Picasso's breakthrough work. Les Demues d'Avion. Now, after this encounter, the two artists forged an intimate friendship and artistic camaraderie. We would get together every single day, Braque said, to discuss and essay the ideas that were forming, as well as to compare our respective works. Now, the drastic change in Braque's style of painting can be directly attributed to Picasso. Once he understood Picasso's goals, Braque aimed to strengthen the constructive elements in his work while forgoing the expressive excess of Fauvism. Now, his landscape paintings, in which scenes were distilled into basic shapes and colors, they actually inspired the French art critic Louis Vassels to coin the term Cubism by describing Braque's work as beaux-arts cubiques. So during this pre-war time, this was pre-World War I, Braque was highly productive with Picasso. They were working side by side. They'd invented this new cubism, kind of a way of breaking up an image, focusing on color and shape, like Fauvism, but not really giving it any emotional ties. He wasn't putting emotion into the colors, into the shapes. He was just breaking up pictures into colors and shapes. So as I said, during this pre-war time, it was highly productive for Braque, and he made large contributions to modern art, particularly through this exploration of Cubism. He kind of called this the analytic and synthetic phase of the movement, when they were really kind of honing in and perfecting the technique. Now, Braque believed that an artist experienced beauty in terms of volume, of line, of mass, of weight, and through that beauty, he interprets his subjective impression. Now, he described objects shattered into fragments as a way of getting closest to the object. Fragmentation helped me to establish space and movement in space, he says. Now, at this time that he was breaking objects up into fragments, playing with cubes, and really deconstructing the shapes, as he said, he also adopted this kind of monochromatic and neutral color palette. He believed that having such a neutral palette, monochromatic, just kind of one color or shades of that color, would emphasize the subject. It'd make you focus on the subject, focus on the fragmentation, not so much the bright, bold colors we were seeing in other movements. Now, Braque and Picasso's productive collaboration continued as they worked closely until the beginning of World War I in 1914. Now, Braque was enlisted in the French army at the break of the war. In May 1915, Braque received a severe head injury in battle, and he suffered temporary blindness. He was trepanned, and he required a long period of recuperation. Braque resumed painting in late 1916. And this is kind of when he starts to break away from Picasso. Working alone, he began to moderate the harsh abstraction of Cubism. He developed a more personal style, characterized by brilliant color, textured surfaces, and after a relocation to the Normandy seacoast, he had the reappearance of human figures. He wasn't just doing landscapes anymore or still life. Humans started coming back into his imagery. Now, he still painted many still lifes during this time, maintaining his emphasis on structure. Now, when Picasso began to paint figuratively, Braque felt his friend had betrayed their Cubist systems and rules, and he continued on his own. However, he did continue to remain influenced by Picasso's work, especially in regard to papier coulé. Now that is French for pasted paper or paper cutouts. This was the collage technique pioneered by both artists using only pasted paper. So paper coulé is, we often call it collage. It's a type of collage and collaging technique in which paper is adhered to a flat mount. Now the difference between collage and paper coulé is that the latter refers exclusively to the use of paper, while collage, the former, may incorporate other two-dimension non-paper components. So paper can be, or collage can be any found materials, where paper coulé is paper. You're putting paper onto paper, that's it. You're not gluing other found items like a collage can have. Now, we kind of call it all collage, right? You know, paper on paper, other things on paper, we just know it as collage. But the term paper coulé is what Braque and Picasso were known to do, is taking found paper and gluing it onto a flat mount. Now, Braque's collages feature geometric shapes, kind of his cubism style, interrupted by musical instruments, grapes, or furniture, kind of like those still life paintings he was doing. These were so three-dimensional that they are considered important in the development of Cubist sculpture. Now, collage helped Braque to realize that color acts simultaneously with form, but has nothing to do with it. He made collages to inspire painting compositions, but also his works themselves. In this collage here, this is called Violin and Pipe. He chooses a stringed instrument as his subject matter. Since there is no concrete evidence that this is a violin, one can understand better how Braque is studying the shapes within the object and pulling them apart to move them around. Now, by 1918, just a couple years, he felt he had sufficiently explored collage, paper coulé, and he then again returned to his still life painting. Now, viewers noted a more limited palette at Braque's first post-war solo show in 1919. Yet, he steadfastly adhered to Cubist rules about depicting objects from multifaceted perspectives in geometrically patterned ways. In this, he continued as a true Cubist longer than Picasso did, whose style, subject matter, and palettes continuously changed. Braque was most interested in showing how objects look when viewed over time in different temporal spaces and pictorial planes. So again, he was focused on structure, on shape. He, unlike his other artists that were putting kind of emotion into their work, using color and shape to display that, Braque he liked the structure and the shape. He was dissecting that in this fragmentation Cubist way. Now, in 1929, Braque took up landscape painting once again, using new, bright colors, again influenced by Picasso and Matisse. Then, in the 1930s, Braque began to portray Greek heroes and deities, though he claimed the subjects were stripped of their symbolism and ought to be viewed through a purely formal lens. He called these works exercises in calligraphy, possibly because they were not strictly about figures, but more about sheer line and shape. In the latter half of the 1930s, Braque embarked on painting his Venettas series, through which he extensionally considered death and suffering. Now, growing increasingly obsessed with the physicalities of his paintings, he explored the ways in which brushstrokes and paint qualities could enhance his subject matter. So, as I said, he's still experimenting. So he's kind of sticking to that cubist style, breaking his paintings into fragments, but he's trying out new subjects. He is putting a little more meaning into his paintings through the 20s and through the 30s. Now, the objects used in his still lifes were highly personal to Braque. However, he did not reveal these meanings. He wasn't an open book. Skulls, for example, were objects he painted repeatedly on the onset of World War II. In 1944, when World War II ended, Braque began to embrace lighter subjects like flowers, billiard tables, and garden chairs. His final series of 8 canvases, made from 1948 to 1955, each titled Atelier or Studio, depicted imagery that represented the artist's inner thoughts on each object, rather than clues to the outside world. At the very end of his life, Braque painted birds repeatedly, as the perfect symbol of his obsession with space and movement. So again, as I said, the reason he painted in Cubism, the reason he fragmented things is because he was obsessed with space, with shape, with structure. But as he painted, he kept putting himself into the paintings, and even though he said he was focusing on the structure of things, he did put his own meanings into his artwork, like every artist does. And yeah, at the end of his life, birds became the perfect representation for it all. So, George Braque was actually the first living artist to have his work exhibited in the Louvre in 1961, and he passed away in 1963. Natural causes. He painting up until the end of his life. He lived a good, long, happy life, living into his 80s. So what is the legacy of George Braque? What did he leave behind for us? So Braque is remembered as an inventor of Cubism, who was both rational and sensacious in his still life paintings. He was a classic painter in this sense, and he has influenced multiple art movements. Braque is also a celebrated colorist, and he can be traced through contemporary art to those painters who work with color in similar ways. But perhaps Braque is most remembered for his use of collage, as many contemporary artists, from sculptors like Jessica Stockholder to painters like Mark Bradford, they apply paper to their works as a means to comment on society and its products. Now, in addition, as a testament to his genius, as I said, he was the first living artist to have his works exhibited in the Louvre. And as befits one of the great 20th century painters, Braque's works hang in the best art museums in Europe and the United States, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the French National Museum of Modern Art, the Kunstmuseum in Bern, and the Moderna Museet in Stockholm. So he's exhibited all over the world, and still today, long after he has left the earth, we still study and try his techniques in painting. He spent 80 years of his life breaking down structure, sometimes focusing on form, sometimes focusing on expression through his art. And yeah, he just made the world a more beautiful place with his beautiful artwork. Well, there you have it, everybody. That is the life, the artwork, and the legacy of George Braque. Thank you for swimming through his life with me today. Now it is time to take all that we've learned and put it onto paper. So I want you to grab a blank piece of paper or your art journal. open up to a blank page. We are going to write down those 3 key terms that I brought up in the beginning, and then we're going to try out some cubism, try out some fragmentation, just like George Braque himself. So let me flip this camera around, get out some paper, pencil, and it will take about 5 minutes to put what we learned onto paper. All right, sketchbooks out, pencil in hand. Let's get this man's name onto paper, huh? So today we studied George, George, Braque, and that is Braque. And what were our 3 terms? Can you recall? They were fragmentation. So fragmentation, it comes kind of hand in hand with cubism. It is the process of breaking things into small and separate parts. So this is what George Braque did to his paintings. He broke a landscape into small fragments, broke a still life, a person. As you looked at those paintings, he broke them into different shapes. Cubism is usually cubes, but fragmentation is even smaller, and that's what George Braque is known for. Our next term was monochromatic. Now, monochromatic is kind of using only one color. As you saw looking at his artwork, a lot of his paintings were one color and with different shades. Maybe he chose kind of a tan color, but then did light tan, darker tan. So yes, we saw some colorful work because, he worked alongside Picasso and Matisse, who used color, so he tried it out. But George Braque is known for using one color in a painting and just kind of making it lighter and darker throughout. And then our last term was paper coulé, which is French for pasted paper or paper cutouts, and that's collage, a type of collage that George Braque and Picasso invented, and it was where they took pieces of paper and pasted it onto a flat background. So unlike some of the other artists we were looking at, like Hannah Hawk last week, she took photographs. She was photo montage. George used paper. He pasted different colored paper. He did use some things from magazines and some of his art, but mostly he played with paper. So those are our terms: fragmentation, monochromatic, paper collé. Now let's do a little cubism here, a little fragmentation. So what we're going to do, I'm going to give you a simple shape here. And yes, George did a lot of instruments, didn't he? We saw violins, we saw guitars, he did some still life, but we're going to do a very simple image here. I want you to draw a heart right in the middle of your paper, okay? I know you can all draw a heart, so let me see a big old heart right in the middle. Now we are going to fragment this. We're going to make this a cubist heart. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw lines. So first, I want you to go kind of horizontal, vertically across. I just want you to break it up. So a mix of horizontal, diagonal, vertical lines. And I may even just draw a box right around it to kind of, so you can see the different fragments, the different shapes. All right. This is cubism. This is fragmentation right here. We're done. But I am going to challenge you to add some color into it. If you've got some colored pencils, markers, I do encourage you to color in at least the different parts of the heart. You could also, each section, maybe you want to do different patterns, and that's another way you can kind of add. Now you may remember we've done cubism before. Around Easter we made some cubism Easter bunnies like Picasso. We have studied and done it, and Picasso is known for his cubism, but George Braque, as I said, was right there with him the whole time, and he took it a little further with fragmentation, making things even smaller, really focusing on the structure. So there is our cubism heart today. Well, everyone out there, I really hope that you enjoyed learning about George Braque today. I am a firm believer, I say it every week, it is important to learn and study other people's artwork because that helps us dial in our own artistic techniques. So I hope you learned something today. I hope you tried something new and that through that you are creating your own style, your own art. Thank you for joining me. I hope to see all you wonderful artists again next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day and happy creating, everybody. Bye.